Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Authors on Mission podcast, the podcast committed to bringing you top-tier insights and strategies from established experts who've achieved a remarkable success in their fields. I'm your host, Danielle Hutchinson, Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Denise Brosseau, CEO of Thought Leadership Lab. She is the author of Ready to Be a Thought Leader, which is an award-winning book. And on today's episode, we're going to explore how to transition from being a successful leader to becoming an influential thought leader who can drive meaningful change across industries. So whether you're an aspiring author, an entrepreneur, or professional looking to expand your influence, Denise is going to share some practical strategies for amplifying your ideas and creating lasting impact. So let's dive in. Denise, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Danielle.
Yeah, it's a true honor. I was just talking to Denise about how, being a thought leader is something that, kind of just touches upon many different areas. To all of our listeners today who are aspiring writers, entrepreneurs, whatever it is the kind of thing that we can all learn from in one way or another. So I'm really excited to have you on and kind of, pick your brain about your different strategies and everything that you've covered in your book and in your Thought Leadership Lab as well.
Whatever you'd like to talk about. These are definitely my people, folks who want to be authors, folks who are building their business around their authorship. This is the work of today, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Before we get into all of that, I always like to kind of start the podcast by, if you don't mind sharing a little bit more about yourself, anything I might not have already mentioned, and then also what led you to writing your book?
Sure. So I started my early career in the tech industry. I moved to Silicon Valley after college and kind of fell in love with the tech industry and did that for a couple of years, got an MBA. And coming out of my MBA program, I met up with a couple of folks in my class and we started a first of its kind trade association for women building venture funded companies. So it was really the early days. Women were just beginning to access venture capital, very little at the time. And our goal was to just increase that significantly. So we built the organization first. I was working full time in tech and doing it on the side. But over time, it got pretty big. And I realized I needed to quit my day job and go do this full time. And so I did that for 5 years, additional on top of the earlier 5 years. So for that whole 10-year period, it was really a focus on women, access to capital. How can we create programs and services that allow people to understand that transition? So I also started a venture conference for women entrepreneurs called Springboard. And that was really where I doubled down all my time and energy. And so fast forward a few years later, after I left there and turned it over to another leader, I got a call from a friend one day who said, "Hey, Denise, you know how you were that thought leader in women's entrepreneurship?" She said, "I want to do that." And honestly, Danielle, that was the first time I'd ever thought of myself as a thought leader. Like, that was not the plan. I was running a nonprofit. I was trying to make a difference for women entrepreneurs. But the truth is, I was a thought leader because I was one of the very few people in the United States talking about this issue, really on many platforms, trying to advocate for this cause that I cared so deeply about. And since then, I've really turned my time and attention to that work with others. Like, how can I help others, mostly women leaders, really advance through this journey from leader to thought leader?
Well, hey, first off, I think it's really inspiring to know, you weren't even, on a path wanting to set yourself into this role. It was more so just driven by your passion and your desire to make these changes, which is really cool. That being said, one of my questions I wanted to ask you is, what sparked your interest in this? But I guess you kind of fill that in for us, just this drive and passion for positive change. Is that correct?
Yeah. I really love to work with change agents. I want to move forward big ideas, whether it's transforming an industry, a particular field that people work in. And what's fun about my work is that I get to learn lots of different things, working with people in education or biotech or financial services. And my book was really designed to be for that person on that precipice of understanding that they need more influence, they need more impact, they need to potentially leave a legacy, and that they care deeply about something that they're making change around. And those are the people I wrote this book for. I really kind of wrote it for my younger self. I wrote it to that girl starting out, in the nonprofit world, thinking she was running a nonprofit and not understanding that I was also on a journey to make change. And those conversations were not conversations I was having. But boy, I wish I did.
Right, understood. And, basing off what you just said and the topic of audience, right? You kind of were speaking to your younger self and to women who might have been in your same shoes. In terms of writing the book, what kind of mindset and strategies do you have to use in order to actually, write for that audience? As a podcast directed towards authors, that's sometimes a challenge to make sure you're writing with that audience in mind. Did you have any sort of strategy for that?
Yeah, I come from the marketing world, so I understood the concept of having an avatar. And one of my friends who had written a number of books, she said, like, literally physically put a picture of your avatar on the wall. And the funny thing is, it really was my younger self. So I kind of put a picture of my younger self. And whenever I was writing, that's who I was writing to. Like, what was she struggling with? What was she so unsure about? I was unsure about my voice and my ideas and how to craft something unique. I was struggling with the mindset piece, all of it. And so really, as I sort of sorted out chapter by chapter, I was trying to lay out a pathway who honestly didn't know she was on this path, but was stumbling along it, as it were. I call myself more of an accidental thought leader. So I'm trying to help people be more intentional, be more planful about it. And I was kind of thinking about, if I had known then what I know now, what would it have been that was helpful? And I think that's what we should all be doing. Whoever that person is, what is it they should know now that they don't yet know? And how can we talk to them in a way that is, I talk a lot about guide from the side. You don't have to have all the answers. It's not sage from the stage. But as whoever your audience is, what are their day-to-day worries and struggles? And how can you show them other people's path, your own path, and some ideas on how to move forward? I think that's really what creates a great book.
Well, I think that response right there just had some really awesome key quotes and tips in it just right there. I mean, I love the idea of, putting a picture on the wall of your younger self or whoever you want that avatar to be. To all of our listeners out there, amazing tip number one right there for you. I think that's really awesome. A way to draw inspiration and get yourself in the mindset. And Denise, I wanted to compliment you on your word poetry there, guide from the side, sage from the stage. It really, I love the play on words, but also it's really impactful. I can see why you're good at what you do.
Thank you.
It came so naturally. Well, kind of branching off of that then, you had your target audience in mind. Now, based on that, you came up with that 7-step process for becoming a thought leader. Perhaps you can shine a little light about what those 7 steps are and, which of those is most, I guess, widespread. Which do people most struggle with, would you say?
I think really the first step is always the hardest for people. And it's the step of figuring out what niche or niche you want to play in. Like, where are you unique? Where not only are you unique in your expertise or your experiences, but what is it you're passionate about that you're going to stick to it for a while? Whenever I talk with aspiring thought leaders, if we don't get that right, the rest of it is a waste of time, because thought leadership is a long distance journey, right? It doesn't happen overnight. So if you're not passionate and committed to that particular niche, and then we also, those early chapters, it's really about figuring out what are the trends you're aligning to, who will get on board with your ideas. So the journey is a journey of being a change agent as well as being a thought leader, because I believe that thought leaders should be taking us on the journey with them of the change that they're trying to bring about. So they're not standing at the end saying, you should do this. Nobody wants to read that book. Nobody wants to be advised in that way, whether it's a blog or anything else. So instead, if we can be evolving our own journey with somebody else and showing them what's working and what isn't, that's when I think we're most compelling. So those first couple steps are uncovering your allies, looking for those who will come on board with you. The middle step of the book, which probably we all struggle the most with, is about mindset. How do we stay focused? How do we fire the itty bitty shitty committee in our brain that is always telling us that we're not good enough or we don't know anything or whatever the voice is saying? And then the later chapters are really about taking those deep dives into your expertise to think about what are the frameworks that you can offer others. What's the best practices literally in your field? What are the tips or the toolkit or whatever? How can you shape that? And then finally, how can you build community around change? Because whatever change you're trying to bring about, you can't do it by yourself. And so it's looking for your allies that are in a particular adjacent field and figuring out how to convene them and get everybody speaking, as it were, out of the same songbook so that we're all aligned and maybe in harmony would be really nice.
Understood. Well, thanks for that nice overview there. And I'm sure that, when you read the book, they go into much greater detail. So to anybody who found that, resonates with them particularly, or even one of the 7 steps, you can check out the book and kind of read a little bit more about it. I did skim through it a bit and I was able to, pick up some amazing insights. And, I think that one thing that I noticed appears in your book is the nurturing relentless curiosity aspect of it, which I think goes to say what you were just saying about how you're not telling people to do a certain thing. You're trying to guide them to it. And I guess that nurturing curiosity has a hand to play in that. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that? I mean, how do you maintain this curiosity, and has it contributed to your own success as a thought leader?
Yes, I do think it has. I suspect if my mother were still alive, she would tell anyone that asked that I was a curious young person, just as I'm a curious older person, that, I've always been a reader, I'm a lifelong learner. I'm always going to classes, taking another certification, whatever it might be. And for me, and I think it's why I like my work. As I mentioned, I get to learn about all these different fields. So if you are a learner, if you're someone who craves more information, understanding how the world works, and if you're not, you can nurture that. I think putting yourself into a book club, creating a small group at work that is into innovation and learning and testing out different innovation techniques, trying scenario planning, trying future casting, things where you start to learn how to be more relentlessly curious, learn how to be a better observer. I think that you can be either born with it, as perhaps I was, and you can nurture it and be trained in it. And in all of those cases, it's better not to go alone. I think, it's much more fun if you can have a collaborative group that you're playing with.
Understood. Yeah, I mean, I always say, whatever it is you're doing, having a team by your side makes it so much better. I mean, at Authors on Mission, if you work and, with our group, you have like a team of people helping you along. So same concept, right? Whatever
Absolutely.
it is, to have people behind your back. So my next question to you then is more geared toward the writing process itself. So for example, you're always advising people how to articulate their ideas and how to get it across to others. Did you follow the same set of tips when you were writing? I mean, what was your approach like for writing? Was it similar to what you recommend?
That's always a good question, is what did I walk my talk?
Yes, exactly.
So my book came about in kind of an unusual way. Unlike many who write a whole book and then go out and try to get it sold, I was fortunate to get approached by a publisher, and we did the project plan up front, as it were. So I had this wonderful developmental editor who found me and approached me about writing a book. And she said, have you ever wanted to write a book? And I said, I've always wanted to write a book, but never done it. And so I pitched her 3 ideas. And what was interesting is that the book that eventually became Ready to Be a Thought Leader, I had already been teaching workshops about it. I had already been working as a consultant, doing thought leadership consulting for a while. And so it was a natural to do this book. And I showed her this visual that a friend of mine who's a graphic facilitator had done that outlined one of my talks. And it was this beautiful journey map. And it at the time, only had 5 steps. And the woman took one look at it and she's like, that's your book. And over time, as we worked together, it evolved into 7 steps, which I think made it a much stronger book. And that was the beginning of starting to write blog posts. It was starting to, figure out what is the first chapter going to look like. And then the deadline started to approach. I was being a little bit lackadaisical. I was kind of, periodically working on it. And then I think for many authors, we all understand like that deadline is very focusing. It's like, I got to get this book done. And so then I got really process oriented every morning up, same time, at my desk within 20 minutes. The cat got fed, and that was about it. Everything else was about and I would write every day till 3. I was extremely structured chapter by chapter. I had people who I brought in to help me redline, which was terrifying. Friends of mine to read chapters. I mean, I had just a few months at that point to get it done because I had an actual contract. So would I recommend everybody do it the way I did it? Probably not. But I do think the structure helped. As my book coach called it, the bum glue, that you glue your bum to that chair, and you just keep writing, and then getting some help from people who were stronger editors. I think all of those things really helped.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that process, by the way. I think a lot of people listening today can 100% relate to that story, right? Like, thinking you have all this time and then suddenly, boom, you have to make sure you meet that deadline. It's funny, a lot of my own clients, the reason they work with an angel writer or an editor is because you have, or, in your case, a book coach too, somebody to nudge you along and hold you accountable. Sometimes it's hard to do on your own. Would you agree?
Absolutely right. And if I didn't have my developmental editor, this book wouldn't have been done. If I didn't have my friends who are both prolific authors, really encouraging me and believing that I could do it, I don't think it would have happened. Although I do tell the story about my friend Mary, who had written, 4 books by the time my book came out. And I was very proud of myself in that January timeframe when the first draft got done. And I was, 6 weeks early for the deadline. I had a whole lot of work left to do, but I was feeling pretty proud of myself, blah, 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 kind of strutting around. And she's like, Denise, you do have 7 more drafts to go. And I remember just hating her in that moment. Of course, she was right. There was 7 more drafts to go. Unfortunately, many more months before the final deadline. But I was so excited until I wasn't, when I realized, yeah, it's a long process. You got to have people. Got to have people.
Yeah, I mean, I like they brought that up twice now. It is important to have people by your side and guiding you along and, again, just giving you that nudge. So, I guess one tip that maybe you and I could both recommend to anybody listening today is, either, have somebody to work with, such as, people with authors on mission, like angel writers or ghost writers or, editors, but also a book coach, a beta reader.
My mother was like instrumental in mine. She read every draft of every page, every version, and she knew the difference between an M dash and an N dash. And I still don't know, but she corrected everything. And she was really good at doing some research for me too. So she was my secret weapon. I think if I hadn't had her, I'm not sure that book ever would have been done.
Yeah, well, that's the long lines I was going to mention too. You don't always have to hire somebody either.
No.
Sometimes
get some fellow authors who are on the same journey with you. Yes.
Yeah, or even if it's not an author, I've had clients who, they're entrepreneurs, so they also they utilize their own staff. Like, hey, when you have a sec, can you just look over this chapter for me? Or the more you talk about it, even at like, your morning coffee session, when people are going to start asking you, oh, how's your book coming along? And you don't always want to say, working on it. You want to have that proud.
You want to be done something.
Yeah. So, actionable steps today, everybody, just start talking about your book. Maybe if you have a blog or social media, update your followers on it. It's going to hold you accountable no matter what, too. So,
yeah, and they will weigh in. I also had my final person that helped was I had a former colleague. And when the book was done, I realized that I was, 10, 12,000 words too long for what had been committed to write. And so I gave her the book. I'm like, here's the sections that I think are too big, and I want you to cut it, and I don't want you to tell me what you cut. Because I think we get really, really attached to those words, and we think, oh, they have to stay in. I'm like, no, just cut them. I don't want to know. I don't want to see it. When it's done, bring it back to me. And she was able to, say, well, you said this already in chapter 2, like, let's cut it out in chapter 7. But by the time you've written chapter 7, you forgot what was in chapter 2. So you do need that sort of final set of eyes who's friendly and kind and also merciless in cutting things.
Yeah, perfect. A lot of amazing examples there. And I want to rewind a little bit here and talk about the very first person and the most important person to read it was your mother. I noticed you mentioned her a couple of times during this podcast. Was she an instrumental, inspiration, you would say, to the book in general or into your career? I
In my
guess,
career, absolutely. My mom just passed a year ago and we were very
I'm so
close.
sorry.
Thank you. It was 93. She was ready to go, but I'm sorry every day to lose her. She was absolutely there for all of us with their three girls, and I'm the youngest. And she was always believing in us and absolutely pushing us to be our best. And was there. Not only did she teach me how to spell, which did become a very handy thing somewhere along the way, but she edited every blog I ever wrote. She edited the book, and she was always interested in what I was learning. And I think that encouraged me to keep learning, to have someone else who was as interested in my journey. She was homebound for the last few years. So having all of us, I think, out in the world also made her really happy because she couldn't get out in the world anymore by the end.
Yeah, well, it's always great to have somebody so close to you also inspiring you and guiding your hand like that too. I mean, clearly a big part of your whole career was, having that team with you, and she played an instrumental role, as you're saying. So to everybody listening, I mean, you gotta be grateful for the people in your lives too.
Absolutely. I don't know if everybody could have predicted. We didn't get along as well when I was a teenager, but it sure turned out well
Who
in the end.
does,
Who
right?
does?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, sort of transitioning, back to the book a little bit here. We talked a little about the 7 steps. I'm wondering if you can express a little bit more about, let's see here. When I was skimming through, I found a section about, the way forward, where you mentioned that thought leaders, they share their successes, failures, best practices. Has being vulnerable about failures been difficult for you? Has it impacted your influence at all?
Yeah, I do think that that is such a challenging piece for all of us as we step into that more public persona. Like, what am I sharing and what am I not? And when I was writing the book, I didn't want to put myself everywhere in the book. So I found a few places where my own journey was relevant. And I talked about what was hard about it and the challenges, both because the work that I was doing was in an area that we were really the first people working on this access to venture capital. And even the people that I thought were going to be my supporters, women venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, I thought were going to be really gung ho with the activities we were doing. They weren't. And so I talk about that moment of realizing that I was standing in front of this audience of women trying to pitch this idea of this venture conference and getting absolutely no support until one of the women walked up and took the microphone out of my hand. I'll never forget. Her name was Helen. And she said to these women, "Ladies, get on board." And I was like, everybody was kind of stunned. She was very firm and very sure of herself. And she really lectured these women about why what I was doing was important and why it mattered. They themselves had talked about the need for this venture conference and that this was their time to get involved. And they, at the end of that evening, they all got involved, and it had nothing to do with me. It had to do with her. And that's what I talk about from that example. I talk about how, in addition to needing your posse, you need your champions. That woman didn't know me that well, but she was in the organization. She trusted me. And what I should have done is trusted her more and sort of invited her to get up and be that champion. So I think it's telling the stories of things that were hard. That I don't know that I told a lot of failure stories, but I certainly talked about some of the things for all the people that I quoted in the book and whose stories I showcased. I talked about the hard parts as well as the easy parts.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's important to have that balance too. When you're writing a book, especially a nonfiction book, you don't want to keep sharing the successes and the praises because then your
It was
audience,
so easy. No.
you want to be real with them. They need to see the true picture of what to expect, but also who's going to relate to somebody who's like, my life was perfect and things went great. Everyone has challenges. So it's great that you're
Everyone has
responsive.
challenges. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing I realized that you mentioned was that the idea that you didn't want to put yourself everywhere in the book. You kind of picked those places where it was most relevant. I think that's something a lot of our listeners could, learn from too. As much as we want to write a memoir about all of our experiences, at the end of the day, it's the insights that we want to hear more about. So we're not making it all about ourselves, but more so about the theories.
Oh,
So
well put. Well put. I think it is the insights, and it's the insights that people will learn from. They learn from our stories. They learn from the good stories and the bad stories. We're all hooked on stories. And so even thinking strategically about who else's story you're going to share in the book. I'd love to talk more about that if you'd be open to sort of how.
please, yeah.
Yeah, I think that that is such an important piece. If you're not going to write a memoir, which I was certainly not compelled to do, I was really thinking about the people who I'd met in my career, in my life, and in my business school, whose stories just to me, needed to be told. And when I think about the couple things that got me to write my book, one of them was those stories and wanting those stories to be out in the world. So I tell a story in the book about a woman that I met in business school who, after Stanford, she came out as a lesbian who was in the military at a time when there was a very big fight going on at the national level. Clinton had just come into office. And so she went public, even though she was really not supposed to. And they immediately tried to push her out of the military. And fascinatingly enough, she got a really good law firm here in Silicon Valley, and she won her case. And they couldn't push her out because of some obscure, arcane piece of legal secretiveness. I don't know what they did, but they figured it out. She didn't get pushed out. But interestingly enough, she was the only person who was ever known to be gay who was allowed to stay. And so for 17 years, she became the face of that group of people. All the time, people were talking about those people, but those people, if they were gay and in the military, couldn't speak for themselves. She was the only one who could. And so she became the face of the entire generation of people, men and women, who were in the military. And fortunately, she's got a good sense of humor, because after a 17-year journey, she was finally on the stage with Obama when he repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and he handed her the pen after, when in the official signing. And I just wanted to tell that story. Like, here is this amazing woman and all the things she did along that 17-year journey, and even that she at the end was telling jokes to Obama while he's signing this the repeal of the law. So I think those stories are what compelled me to write this book, is people like that who I think, boy, she's way more amazing than I will ever be. I want to tell that story for others.
Yeah. I mean, like, any way that you can spread that sort of message in whatever regard you're able to is, definitely going to leave an impact, right? Because I hadn't heard that story before, right? So it's something that you got to put out there. I'm really glad that you shared that with our podcast too, because any author, listening to this too might relate to that as well. Get out of your comfort zone, just try to make an impact like that.
That's what we can hope.
Yeah, so I mean, like, your book includes numerous examples and stories from thought leaders just like that, right? So
Yes.
I'm sure you had so many examples out there from your experience, like maybe just even like a whole list of people. How did you narrow it down? Was there a process you used to figure out which stories to include, what needed to be left out?
Yeah, for me, what was guiding me along the way was this 7-step process. So in each chapter, my developmental editor and I would sort of worked out that I needed at least one strong story for each of the 7 chapters. And then I could have some smaller stories that were not necessarily the anchor story. The anchor stories got called out in a special way in the design, but then it might have been small, maybe a paragraph story or 2-paragraph story about someone that didn't. But those anchor stories were the key, and they had to hang together in a way that proved the points of the 7 steps. So that, I think, is how I chose, was that in each case, I had interviewed a lot of different people, both clients, colleagues, friends, as well as random people. I reached out to some guy I saw on the internet, on Twitter, who I just thought was so compelling. And I, sent him a DM and said, hey, can I interview you about your thought leadership journey? And he said, sure. Whatever. And so there was people I had never met before. And then it was, the husband of somebody I knew, et cetera. There was a lot of people that I'd interviewed. But then I was sort of distilling the stories and saying which one highlights each point. And that's how I chose.
Understood. Yes, you kind of had that whole process too, and you were even reaching out to people as well, which is really cool. And a tip for everybody to hear as well. If you need examples and case studies, maybe if it's not fitting in your exact framework, you need to make those connections. So that's
Yeah, keep asking around. There's going to be, I would tell people, hey, I really need somebody who's kind of done something like this. And they'd be like, oh, you should talk to XYZ. And I think it goes to that same point you made earlier that we have to reinforce, which is we do have to talk about our book before it's done. We have to be willing to put ourselves out there, but take the risk that people might go, you can't write a book, or whatever we're thinking they're going to say, which, by the way, they never say. And instead, people are more likely than not going to be helpful if we give them that opening and we say, here specifically is what I need. People go, oh, then you specifically need to talk to these 2 people.
Understood. Well, one thing to think about though too is all of these stories have been almost at least a decade since, they've been told, being that the book came out about a decade ago. I guess I'm
Mhm.
curious to know, if you thought about publishing a new edition anytime soon, or if you would you change or add on to it?
So I think that's a great thing to think about for all of us as our books get a little older. But the good news for me is that instead of doing another book, I decided to do some online courses. And I had the opportunity with LinkedIn Learning, and with their design, again, you're doing small, short videos with lots of examples of people. So what I did was I took an updated, newer examples in my courses. So I have a course on individual thought leadership and one on organizational thought leadership. And I particularly wanted to do the second one because I had a real inkling that maybe I should do a book on organizational thought leadership, because the first book was for individuals, but I didn't have it in me at the time. It was COVID. It was just, I was exhausted. And so I didn't write that book, but instead had this opportunity to do this course. And then I got to say and put my frameworks out and put my perspective out in this online course. And the truth is that those were really fun to do in a way that perhaps writing the book wasn't, but you still needed to do a lot of the same work of distilling what you know and creating the good stories that draw it together. So I haven't yet written another book. And if I was going to update the first one, I think I would do it with a series of videos or courses rather than trying to publish another book. The truth is the book still sells and now is selling internationally in ways that it didn't used to. And the course brings more people to the book.
Understood. So, to anybody listening today, that's an amazing way to help make your book evergreen, right? A lot of people write their book, they put it on the shelf, and, after a while, it's going to become less relevant just by nature. So, having those courses to keep it updated and also feed more with readers to the book, it's a win-win situation.
It is. And then, of course, I teach as well, and then I try to bring the book into the classroom, and I think that's also another fun way to bring your book to life.
Yeah, well, hey, I wonder, perhaps would you like to share a little bit more about this course? If anybody today listening was inspired by your, 7 steps, your process, and they want to learn a little bit more, how can they find more information about it? What can they expect from it?
Sure. So for those who are not yet premium members of LinkedIn, you can buy each course in LinkedIn Learning separately as an individual course. But if you're a premium member, I think it's called, I think it's premium member of LinkedIn, you get all the courses for free. So it's a tab on your LinkedIn header and of the menu bar. And I think it's way far on the right. You click on LinkedIn Learning and it brings up all the courses. And then you can search for my name or search for thought leadership. And my course, my 2 courses on organizational and individual thought leadership are there. Both of them are about an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and a half. You get a nice certificate and they are accredited. So you get course credit, especially if you're in any kind of a field like lawyer or accountant or whatever. For entrepreneurs, perhaps that's less valuable, but I do think that there's a lot of particular professionals that need these kinds of CE credits. So the way it's designed is short videos with questions at the end and then a quiz at the very end to make sure that you grasp. But it also comes with a whole lot of downloadable worksheets. I'm a girl who loves a good worksheet, so I designed all these worksheets, and I also sell those worksheets separately on my website. And the design is really to go with each step in the process. As you're working through the step-by-step journey of thought leadership, having a series of questions to ask yourself or to sit down with someone and do together, I found can be very motivating for people to actually get the work done and not just, oh, I read this nice book and, like you said, put it on a shelf and never looked at it. I want people to put this to work. And that's why I created the course and the workbook and all of the things to try to make it approachable, but also step by step, not so scary.
Yeah, and I think that for anybody listening today, if you also want to make your work more engaging and make sure that readers and listeners are actually, interacting with it and implementing it, a worksheet is an amazing way to do that because they feel inclined to, actually make that step rather than just taking in information. So
Yeah. And the truth is ChatGPT is really good to help you create worksheets. I did mine long before ChatGPT, but now when I go do a workshop, I will say, here's kind of what I want people to learn. Here's the experiential piece, and here's the training that I'm going to do. Now give me a nice worksheet layout. And they're like, okay, here's the questions I would ask. And I already have a design that I use consistently, but that can be really fast. ChatGPT is a whole lot faster at that than I am, I've realized.
hey, yeah, I mean, I always recommend, if you know how to use AI in a way that's going to help you, go for it, right? I don't recommend using it to write your book or, to do a big amount of editing, but for tasks like that where it can, just pull some information, throw it into a worksheet for you, perfect use for it. So that really
Really.
streamlines the process, yeah. So, that being said, I'm wondering, first off, do you happen to have a copy of your book near you?
I do actually.
Ooh, okay. I had a feeling that was it in the background.
I love
Okay.
it because it's this bright blue that they picked when they designed it, and it pops out of a bookshelf, which I love.
Yeah, so there you go. First off, you never judge a book by its cover, but when it's bright blue like that, people are more inclined to, catch their eye to it. I was like looking at it, I was like, that can't be it, can it? But it was. So
It must be, yeah.
awesome. Yeah, so everybody listening today and watching, that's what it looks like. You can find it on Amazon, I believe, and
Barnes and Noble and
oh,
and order it from your local bookstore.
perfect, perfect. I love it. And we're going to include links to everything that we mentioned in the description box as well, including the link and all of that. So anybody listening, if you're interested after the podcast, you can go ahead and click on all that. So Denise, I'm wondering what is next on the horizon for you? Maybe not another edition of the book per se, but what can we expect in the future from all of your thought leadership?
The work that I'm doing today continues to be with senior leaders, primarily with women leaders, on that journey from leader to thought leader. And I love that I am still getting to do this consulting work and some workshops for companies. I just had the joy of going to London a few weeks ago to do a workshop all day for a client there. And that was like, oh, somebody wants to pay me to go to London. Sure, I'll do a workshop. No problem. But I think what I'm really focused on is that next generation of leaders and the next generation of thought leaders. As I am designing, whether it's a gathering of folks, whether it's a webinar, whether it's doing another course, it's always thinking about how can I pass the baton of what I know to the next group of people. And I think as authors, we should always be thinking that. We have this incredible knowledge, we have this incredible experience as entrepreneurs and as executives, and we don't want people to have to learn all that stuff for themselves. So thinking about what are all the ways in which your content and your experience and your expertise can be shared. So I'm doing a lot of podcasting. I'm doing a lot of convening people and doing workshops and training, but mostly I spend my time doing individual one-on-one consulting with senior executives and entrepreneurs, and I am loving every minute of it.
Hey, I love it. And I love that you're continuing to spread that message. It didn't just end when your book hit the shelves. You're continuing to expand your reach, dabble in new fields and types of industries. I mean, and it's amazing for our listeners to be inspired by and implement themselves. So thanks for that. And we'll be able to, if you're listening today, you can also check out all of that too by clicking on the links as well. So with all that being said, any last pieces of wisdom for our listeners today as we begin to wrap up? What can they take home with them as a, little piece of homework or, worksheet, I guess, actionable step based on what we talked about today? What would you recommend?
Well, I hope that we will put as one of the downloadable files from my website. There's a workbook that people can take as a step-by-step process for themselves. It's very inexpensive. And so I think that would be a good link. But the thing I always end all of my talks with is the same quote. And it's from my own book. And I says that thought leadership is not just about being known. It is about being known for making a difference. Mm-hmm. So my invitation to everyone listening to this, that as an author, as a potential thought leader, as an aspiring thought leader, I really hope that what you're thinking about is that it's not about the clicks and it's not about the followers so much. It is about how can I get people to think in a new way? How can I get people to act in a new way? How can I make a true difference in the world? Because that's what we're here for, in my mind.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And yeah, again, guys, check the description box for all of the links mentioned. And with that, That brings us to the end of another inspiring episode of Authors on Mission podcast. I want to thank you so much, Denise, for sharing your wisdom about leadership and providing, all these actionable insights for our listeners today. And as we've discovered, becoming a thought leader, it's not just, having great ideas. It's about expanding those ideas, engaging with, the people around you, creating those frameworks that, can build lasting change. At Authors on Mission, we're dedicated to empowering you with the knowledge and confidence to become an expert in your own field as well, through writing or anything else. So, check us out on authorsonmission.com, and also be sure to check out Denise's book, Ready to be a Thought Leader, and visit her website for more information. And remember, we immerse ourselves in their world. We bring you the strategies. So join us next time as we continue our mission to help share your expertise and create meaningful impact. Until then, keep writing, keep leading, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Have an amazing day, everybody. This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.